Alrighty, welcome in everyone to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is July 8th, a Monday around here, and we have a great show for you today. We're going to start talking a little bit about some of the talking points heading into the season. Only 47 days out from this thing kicking off, so want to get especially into the Big Ten today and break down some of the big talking points there. Then we'll get into the Group of Five. We'll break down the playoff participant and how it's definitely going to be a huge debate at the end of the season. There are going to be multiple teams that have an argument to be getting into the playoff, and it's going to be a fight, that's for sure. Then we'll get into some teams that I think could just turn their conference on their head. If they hit the right way, then their entire conference could look totally different than what we expect it to be right now. Then we have a bit of a recruiting update. The biggest thing that happened this weekend was Texas moved in the wrong direction. I'll be totally honest, they are definitely not doing what they want to do down in Austin, and I'll break down kind of what that looks like and how it's not huge worry right this second, but it definitely could be in a couple of weeks here. And then we'll do something kind of new around here. We'll do a Monday roundup. There's been tons of news across college football that I just haven't gotten a chance to get to, or just don't have enough information to feel confident about doing a full segment on, but want to break down a couple of the big time headlines. Not some great headlines around college football lately, I'll be totally honest. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show. And the best way for you all to get your question on the screen is to use the tip and donation link at the bottom of the screen, gsmcpodcast.net. It's a huge help not only to us here at the network, but to you all. You get to kind of have a fun, interactive experience here. Get your question on the screen. I'll read it out loud, and we can kind of have a fun time here. So, again, that's gsmcpodcast.net if you'd like to use that. Also, before we jump in, just want to give a quick thank you to everyone. The numbers for the Wednesday show were just incredible, honestly, bigger than I possibly could have imagined. So, gotten a lot of comments and everything. It's been absolutely incredible. So, really appreciate that. But let's jump right in here and let's talk about all the talking points heading into this Big Ten season, because we're only 47 days out, a little less than 7 Saturdays from this thing kicking off, and I am counting down to week 0. I want that to be known because week 0 is when college football starts. I understand week 1 is when everything gets into full swing, but when you have a game like Georgia Tech against Florida State and Ireland in week 0, that's the day I'm going to count down to. I'll just be totally honest. But tons of things that we still have to figure out about this upcoming season. So throughout this week, I'll likely go conference by conference. I'm debating on whether or not I want to do another day of Big Ten tomorrow, because I got 4 questions here or 4 talking points here, but not necessarily remotely covering what all I wanted to cover in this conference. So we'll decide in probably at some point today, and you'll find out tomorrow if I want to continue this on. But let's jump into this thing, and the biggest one that I want to break down first is the Michigan quarterback situation. This could be one of the most important things to happen in all of college football, frankly, because this is going to be a good team. Everyone that is hoping that Michigan is going to fall off a cliff after last year, I wouldn't hold your breath. This is going to be a good team. They're going to be a team that is going to be able to run the ball. They're going to be able to play really good defense, as they have for quite some time up there in Ann Arbor. That's never going to be a real issue as long as Sharon Moore is in town, as long as Jim Harbaugh was in town, but same regime, same type of Michigan, at least in terms of approach. So there are a ton of things that kind of make this go sideways, and the quarterback position is likely the biggest one, right? That's the biggest question going into this year, because when you have someone like J.J. McCarthy walk out the door, he didn't necessarily light the stat sheet on fire. He didn't necessarily have games where he had 5 passing touchdowns and 300 yards passing, anything crazy. He also didn't need to. It was about running that offense at an efficient level, and whoever does that the best is going to be the starter long term. And the funny thing about this one is, I think we'll learn some throughout fall camp, just kind of figuring out, does someone separate themselves from the other? Because it's really an Alex Orji, Jack Tuttle race. That's the 2 guys that you have to watch in this. And I don't think it'll really be decided until week 2. I think that Texas game is going to be absolutely huge, because the reality is their first game is not going to be too tough. I mean, Fresno State's a good team. You'll learn a little bit about these quarterbacks, but I do think you'll see both of them, and I do think both of them will play really good football, to be totally honest. What they do against Texas will define the rest of the season at that position. I think Alex Orji will likely be the guy that trots out for the first drive of the first game and the second game against Texas. what he does from then forward is going to be huge, because this Texas back end is no slouch by any means. It obviously was a place that you could attack them last year, and maybe it is to a certain degree this year, but there's so much experience on that back end for Texas and a really, really good corner in Manny Muhammad that I think is going to have a huge year. So a couple of mistakes, they turn to Jack Tuttle. Maybe he moves it just a little bit more efficiently, and Alex Orji's out the door, and that's the end of his time at, or not his end of his time at Michigan, but end of his time as the starter at Michigan. So it'll be a fascinating thing to watch. I think Texas is the team that will define this quarterback situation. Will Alex Orji tear Texas apart and do some really incredible things? Will he move the offense the way they need to? Because it's not going to be easy, that's for sure. And whoever handles that game better is likely the guy that you'll see starting for the rest of the season for Michigan. I tend to lean that it's going to be Alex Orji, but Jack Tuttle is going to have plenty to say about this. I can almost promise you that. So that'll be a very interesting thing to watch through fall camp and then into the first couple of weeks of the season. But the other one I want to get into is another quarterback battle, or not much of a battle, really. I think Will Howard is going to be the guy at Ohio State, but how does he, take over this offense? Is he going to be the guy that entirely just takes this offense by the throat and really just controls the college football season? Because I've talked about this a little bit before, but Will Howard can outright ruin this college football season in the nicest way possible. He could be as good as really anyone in the country, and if that's the case, it's over. They're going to be in the national title. They're going to be facing off against whoever finds their way there. But this team is too good all over the place for, if Will Howard falls into place, for them not to be in that position. So I think that's the big thing here. And one of the other big things, obviously, Chip Kelly coming in, new offense to learn. It is a QB-friendly offense. There's no two ways about that. He does put his quarterback in really good positions 90% of the time. The thing about that is, it doesn't mean it's easy to run. It doesn't mean that it's an absolute layup to run. It means that you have a lot on your shoulders. It means that you have a lot to worry about as the starting quarterback, but the sky's the limit. If you execute, the sky is absolutely the limit for this kid. And I think the biggest thing here is that's the case around every offense around the country. Every elite offense puts a ton on its quarterback's shoulders, but when you see the quarterback respond and execute that offense, it's a thing of beauty. That's why the LSU offense was so incredible in 2019. Joe Burrow took it by the throat and understood that this was his offense, and he executed it to one of the highest levels I've ever seen in college football. So if Will Howard can pull that off, he can unlock what he was at Kansas State in that 2022 year where he was just remarkable and led them to a Big 12 championship. And if he does that, then this team is going to be nearly impossible to beat. I'll be totally honest with you. But then I want to get into Oregon's defense a little bit, because this is a really good defense. There's no two ways about that. They did great work in the portal, adding some guys that not only are very talented, but have played a lot of really good college football, which is obviously the most important thing when you're breaking these down. And the thing is, Oregon had, I think, the number 33 defense in the country last year in terms of points per game. That's really good. That is right where you need to be, at least if you want to be in the conference conversation for the Pac-12 and possibly make that playoff type run like they did a year ago. You got to be better than that in the Big Ten. I'll just be totally honest. There's going to be some defenses where even an offense like Oregon's that is going to be so high-powered and incredible and probably score more times than they don't, there's going to be times when you're stifled because Ohio State's defense is so incredible, because Michigan's is so incredible, because Penn State's is so incredible. There's going to be times in the game where your offense just can't quite get it going the way that you want. Maybe it's to start a game, maybe it's in the middle, who knows, but your defense has to match that. And it's not like these Big Ten offenses are going to be easy to deal with. Michigan's run game is absolutely insane. Ohio State, top to bottom, is ridiculous. And if Will Howard executes, it's going to be really hard to stop him. So there's a lot of things going into this year. And Oregon's going to be a good defense. There's no two ways about that. I have zero questions about them being at least a top 30, top 25 defense in the country. I think if they want to win a national title and do some of the things that they want to do this year, they got to be top 15, top 10. And I think when you add guys like Jamari Caldwell, Jabbar Muhammad, and a number of others that they added to that defensive side of the ball from the portal, you're going to be more than fine. But taking that next step is going to be huge for them. And I think they definitely have the guys to do it. But we'll find out, early on in the season. Are they a team that is going to take that big time step forward on the defensive side of the ball and not just have to win games via shootout with Dylan Gabriel putting up crazy numbers, but be able to win some slugfest against Ohio State or against Michigan or against some of these bigger teams that are going to be hard to score on regardless of how good an offense you have. So it'll be fascinating to watch that. And then finally, I want to figure out the defining out-of-conference game for this conference, and everyone's going to point to Texas-Michigan, and I fully understand that. That's going to be an incredible game. Two elite teams, both off what has been their best season in quite some time. You know, Michigan coming off a national title, Texas coming off a playoff run, first 12-win season since 2009, so a lot of juice around this game, but weirdly enough, I think this game could go any number of directions. The only way that I think I would drastically change my opinion on either of these teams at the end of the day is if Michigan wins a shootout in this game. I think if Michigan and Texas go 42-38 and Michigan wins a game, then you're worried about Texas and you're sky high on Michigan for totally different reasons. But I do think, for the most part, most of the outcomes here would not necessarily shock me. Whether it's Michigan winning an absolute battle, that's who Michigan's going to be. And if Texas can't handle that atmosphere, that's not the craziest thing in the world to me. Texas winning a defensive battle isn't crazy to me either. I think this defense is going to be really good, and I think Michigan's going to be always tough to score on. I also think Texas winning by 14 points wouldn't be that crazy to me. So overall, I don't think there's enough variability in this game for me to feel like my opinion's going to change too much about these teams. Wisconsin-Bama's another one to watch. I think that one's going to be really fun. If Wisconsin pulls an upset, that's the most defining game, no doubt about it, but I don't necessarily see that happening overall, so I think that's a really fun game, but likely one that won't have too much on the Big Ten season. The one that I'm really interested in is Penn State against West Virginia, and it's for some different reasons. I think this is one of those where if Penn State's going to be the team that they're capable of being this year, if Drew Aller's going to be the guy that he's capable of being, if they're going to show the growth that they need to show this year, this is the game where they send a message. This is the game where they go out, and this is a good West Virginia team that has a ton of experience, that it's going to be a hard-fought battle, but this is a game where Penn State just proves they're the better team from start to finish. They execute at a higher level. They play really good defense. They win by 14, 21 points, whatever that looks like, and show everyone they're not the old Penn State. That's just the reality. So that's going to be a really interesting thing to watch. USC LSU is obviously another one to watch here, but overall, that's going to be a shootout. I really don't see it going much any other direction. So overall, I don't think that's going to be overly crazy. And then you have some other ones. You have Illinois against Kansas. Nebraska against Colorado is going to get tons of press and will be a huge one. But with both those teams where they are in those conferences, not necessarily as defining as some other ones. Then you have UCLA playing LSU. They get both the LA teams, LSU does. Oregon State, and Washington State are now out of conference games, which is just gross to look at, but that's beside the point. And then Minnesota UNC is another really fun one. But overall, the Big Ten's got a ton going into the season, and as I was going through that, I think I'm going to revisit the Big Ten because I have questions about Penn State, I have questions about Nebraska, about Iowa, so we got to get to all of them, and we'll break that down throughout the week and maybe just kind of work our way through the talking points through the next couple of weeks in the Power Four. So that'll definitely be something to be on the lookout for. But after this break, we are going to break down the Group of 5 playoff participant. We're going to get down to the top 5 teams in terms of odds, break down how they could make this type of run, and how there's almost definitely going to be a logjam up at the top, and figuring out who's going to go is going to be not an easy task by any means. So we'll break that down right after this, so stick with us.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows where 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the news it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh,
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just broke down some big talking points around the Big Ten. That will not be the last time that we do that. We're going to work through some talking points just to get really ready for the season. We're getting very, very close to this thing kicking off, and I could not be more excited, but we'll break that down throughout the week, and then we'll continue through the Power Four as we kind of see fit, honestly, over the next couple of weeks. But let's get into the Group of Five playoff, because this is going to be the biggest debate of the entire year. I'll be totally honest. It might not be the most interesting debate of the entire year, because there will be teams like Penn State and teams like Missouri and Tennessee fighting over those last couple of spots, but I can almost promise there's going to be a logjam in the Group of Five playoff team. Someone's got to get in. The top five the top five conference champions get in, and the Pac-12 champions just not getting in. Let's just be totally honest. But the reality is, someone's got to get in, and it's going to be really interesting to see who that team is. And I think the biggest thing here is Group of Five is likely never going to get two teams in. I'd love to tell you that they could, and I think there's a path in even this year where you could have a couple of teams that are worthy of getting in, but let's be totally honest, they want as many of those big-time teams in, and making the argument that a 9-3 SEC team is better than an 11-1 AAC team, not a hard thing to do. I'll just be totally honest. I could do it very, very comfortably and likely win over the entirety of the College Football Playoff Committee. But let's jump into the five teams that have the best odds to make the playoff, and then break down why this is just going to be a huge issue at the end of the year. So it starts with a team that is going to be just really, really good this year in Missouri. Memphis. Missouri is also going to be very good this year, but that's beside the point. Memphis is the team that I want to talk about, and they have the cleanest path. They have the best odds to win the best Group of Five conference in the American. So if you can pull that off, you're going to be successful. That's just the reality, and you can definitely roll into the college football playoff, even with one loss. And there's going to be some big-time chances for them to make some noise throughout the season. You know, they have some big games. One at the end could define their entire season, but guys like Seth Hannigan, Mario Anderson coming in from South Carolina is absolutely huge for this team. Like, as big as any addition for really any Group of Five team across the country. Now, there are a couple of guys at the quarterback position that might be a little bit bigger, but Mario Anderson's going to have a huge say in what Memphis is this upcoming season. I think he's going to be absolutely incredible, and I think anytime you can get a guy to jump down from the SEC ranks down to the American, he's going to have an effect pretty much immediately. So very much like this kid, and I think he's going to be huge. They do have the best odds to win that American Conference, and they're going to be in this conversation. There's no two ways about that. They could lose two games and still be very much in this conversation, but the reality is it could come down to a game with another team on this list in the last week of the season that we'll break down a little bit later here. But I also want to get into Liberty. This is the team that everyone's kind of circling this time of year. The Conference USA is controlled by this team. There's a couple of teams that, you know, are trying to get into that conversation. Western Kentucky being the one that's kind of starting to make a little bit of waves, but there's still a gap there. There's no two ways about that. That's why they're minus odds to win this conference. It's absolutely ridiculous, the gap that has formed in this conference. They do play App State out of conference, which will be a fun game to watch and will help them a lot in this conversation. If they can beat App State, and especially beat them by a touchdown, 10 points, 14 points, they'll show that they might just be the best Group of Five team out there. So it'll be a very interesting game. That might be the most important game, weirdly enough, for them throughout the season, but the reality is, when I look at this team, they have to go undefeated. I see no other way for them to get into the playoff, at least if I was on that committee. I think they are a very talented team. I think they do a lot of really incredible things, but at the end of the day, if you're going to play a schedule that they're playing this season, you pretty much have to run the table to be in this conversation, especially with some of the other teams that are going to be in this conversation that, you know, 11-2 Memphis or 12-1 Tulane or 10-2 Miami of Ohio, whoever it is. I just don't think they necessarily stack up. Now, one of the big things in their favor is they have one of the most electric players in the country. Caden Salter is absolutely ridiculous. He does things on a football field that very few people can do. Let's just be totally honest. And he's a guy that can single-handedly drag them to an undefeated season. The thing is, if he has a game here or there that isn't necessarily up to his standards, what happens? Does this team fall off a cliff? If this team drops one game, if they drop 2 games, are they just dead in the water? And I think that's kind of the reality they're working under. I mean, I believe it was Andy Staples released some very bold predictions for this upcoming season, something I will likely do here pretty soon. But one of them was an undefeated Liberty is left out of the playoff. That is a real reality that could happen because the conference is just not strong. If you're trying to get the best group of 5 team in, I would make the argument that Liberty is not in that conversation, even if they do go undefeated. So a lot going into that. We'll obviously unpack it throughout the season, but it'll be an interesting team to watch. Boise State is the next one I want to zero in on, and they plucked some really, really good players from the Power 5 level, mainly Malachi Nelson, the very talented quarterback that was at USC a year ago, and Chris Marshall, a guy that I believe has bounced around a little bit. He might have just been at A&M, honestly, but regardless, 2 very big-time transfers that were high recruits coming out. Spencer Danielson is coming in as the head coach. He was the interim at the end of last year after Andy Avalos was let go. He is now the DC at TCU, so everyone's bouncing around in the coaching industry right now. But they do have some really, really big games where they can show who they are. I think Oregon's obviously the biggest of the bunch. If they can at least hang around in that game, they'll show that they are an elite team, that they are towards the top of the group of 5, and they don't necessarily need to get close to winning it or, be within 4 points or 3 points or anything crazy. But if you keep this to a 2-possession game, if you're 14 or under, I think that's a huge win for Boise State. And obviously, that doesn't necessarily sound like a huge win, but it really would be in the college football playoffs' eyes. And then you have Washington State also on the schedule, a big-time game where you can just prove, you're a little bit above a team that was just in the Power 5 a year ago. And then UNLV is another one that I'm definitely circling among others in the Mountain West that are going to be huge. And I think the cool thing about this team is they might just have the best player at a certain position in the entire country. And Ashton Jainty is just absolutely ridiculous at the running back position. This dude is incredible, and frankly, I'm shocked that he's still at Boise State. With the state of everything in the transfer portal and everything bouncing around all over the place, I feel like this was a guy that everyone was calling, that everyone was after, that especially with the need at running back for some of these teams. I'm surprised he's still up in Boise. I'm very glad he's still up in Boise, don't get me wrong, but I can't imagine his phone was not blowing up. I'll just put it that way. But let's move right along here to Tulane. This is a very, very interesting team because Boise State, as we talked about, dipped their toe into the portal. They played around, got some big-time players. Tulane just jumped all the way in. They got Ty Thompson, Mario Williams, Shaz Preston on offense. They got Jalen Geiger. They got Lou Tillery and many more on defense. They did a really, really good job of filling out this team that lost a lot of guys this past year. Michael Pratt being the main among them, the quarterback, and Ty Thompson coming in. A lot of really good talent coming from Oregon. A lot of expectations going into this year, but the first time he's ever started for a team. So it'll be very interesting to see how that goes. The chances early in this season are huge for Tulane. They play Oklahoma and they play Kansas State, and both of those are great arguments to say we can at least hang with these teams. It's the same argument that I was making with Boise State and Oregon. You don't necessarily have to win these games. You don't necessarily have to, even stay within 3 points of these games. You just have to prove that you belong on that same field. And that's exactly what they did a couple of years ago against USC. In fact, they beat USC. But both those games are going to be huge. And if they can even win one of them, it's going to really put them ahead of the curve in terms of getting into that playoff. Also, this is a team I just really, really like. I think a lot of things are in place for them. I think John Summerall coming in after Willie Fritz moved on to Houston, which is another guy I'd love to watch over the next couple of years because I think it's going to get really interesting down there in Houston. But I think Summerall is a guy that will be a Power 5 coach within the next, let's say, 3 years. I think it could be next year, frankly, depending on how this goes. If they make the playoff, there will be people calling. I can almost promise you that. Now, it'll be a really interesting thing to watch with, the expanded coaching staffs and everything in between, how all of this kind of plays out. But this is a guy that absolutely will be a Power 5 head coach at least in the next 3 years. I feel pretty confident about that. And another guy that I think is going to be a Power 5 head coach over the next 3-5 years is Jeff Traylor. I think him and UTSA have built something out there that is really, really incredible for a number of reasons. And the biggest moniker for why this is such a good program right now, they're 111th in the country in returning production. They do not return much of anyone. They lose their big-time quarterback, Frank Harris, from a year ago. They lose so many pieces, and they're still top 5 in odds to make the college football playoff. That's how good of a program that Jeff Traylor has built, and he's a star in this business. He is someone that, frankly, he could be a number of different Power 5 head coaching jobs right now, I think. I just think he's turned down a couple to get the right one down the road, and it's coming. I can almost promise you that. Owen McCown is going to take over at quarterback for Frank Harris, which is huge shoes to fill. There's no two ways about that. But Owen McCown is a very, very talented kid. Obviously comes from a very rich quarterback family, so no worries about that. Devin McEwen, the third highest receiver from a year ago, he's their top guy returning. So obviously that kind of plays into the returning production number, and it's going to be low, but the reality is this team has recruited at a really high level, brought in some big-time transfers through the portal, and have done just some really incredible things. The portal is the big one where they brought in a kid that I think can totally flip this season on its head. Denver Harris is a really good cornerback. He ran into some trouble off the field at A&M and then went to LSU and has just never really found his footing. But if he finds his footing, this kid can play really elite football. He can be an outright lockdown corner on the outside for this team. And if that happens, then they're going to roll for a lot of their season. They do play Texas early on in the season. That would be another great place for them to show that at least they belong. At least they're in this conversation. And then you got Memphis down the road, and that's the big one, obviously. If you can knock them off, then maybe you're the team that comes out of the American. So there's a ton going into this season for UTSA and for all of the teams that I just broke down, but that doesn't even scratch the surface of the teams that could make this type of run. Miami of Ohio is a team that I'm watching very, very closely that I think could make some real noise. App State, South Florida is a team I love with Alex Golesh down there. Texas State, another one, DJ Kinney. I absolutely love what he's doing. So there's a lot of things going on around the group of 5 teams, and frankly, this is not an exact science by any means. It's going to be all over the place. The arguments of who deserves to be in, who doesn't deserve to be in, are not going to be easy to be had, but it's going to create a weird logjam, and it'll be fascinating to see what does a 11-2 American team look like compared to a 13-0 Conference USA team, or a MAC team that's 11-2 or 11 or 12-1. Whatever this looks like, it's going to be all over the place. But the reality is, we're running into a big-time logjam at the end of the season, and that battle is going to be just fascinating to watch, really, all throughout the season. But we're going to take our second break here. When we come back, we're going to break down some teams in the Power 5 level that could just turn their conference on its head. If these teams hit, their entire conference changes around them, and it could lead to them being at the very top of their conference. So we'll break that down right after this, so stick with us.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Alrighty, welcome back, everyone. We just talked about the Group of 5 playoff and how there's going to be a logjam. There's going to be a big heated debate in those college football playoff rooms because likely only one of them's getting in, but I could argue about 4 of them would deserve to be in at the end of the year. But that's obviously something we'll break down throughout the season. But let's get into the Power 4 conferences. It still feels weird saying the Power 4, but there are a couple of teams in all of those conferences that I think could just flip them on its head, just entirely change the complexion of a conference almost overnight with some of the games that they could win. And I think there's huge teams that I need to break down here, but the biggest one, the one that I think has all the implications in the world, is Tennessee. Tennessee, there is not a limit to what this team can do this year. I understand that people have their questions about Tennessee and about how, 2022 was just a flash in the pan and they're not that actual team in real time and they won't be able to replicate that year over year. I don't know that to be the case, and only things have been getting better throughout the time of Josh Heupel's era in Tennessee. And when I look at this team, there's one big variable. There's one thing that keeps all of this from being just entirely comfortable with me saying, and them not necessarily being a team towards the top of the SEC, but being a team that is a little bit more dangerous in that dark horse type area, and it's how good that kid plays. How good does Nico Iamaleava play this season? If he hits the way that they're talking about him, this is a team that can win the SEC. Just period, end of story. And it's not just because of him, but they have the most impactful defensive player in the conference, by no question about it. James Pierce Jr. is a game changer. He is someone that in a game this year, I can almost promise you, I don't want to say anything too definitively, but this kid has a 3-sack, 2 forced fumbles, fumble recovery, maybe even a pick. He has one of those games in him. He has a game where it's his for the entire day. It's the same thing that happened with JT Tuiomalau when he went up against Penn State a couple of years ago. Just dominated that game. Won that game pretty much single-handedly for Ohio State. That is what James Pierce Jr. can do. And Josh Heupel has been doing incredible job of filling all the holes that needed to be filled, because I'm looking up and down this roster. I cannot find one. I'll just be totally honest. The receivers are better than they've ever been during Josh Heupel's time, even 2022. I'm being totally honest. Bringing in someone like Chris Brazzell is just absolutely insane. Adding to Dante Thornton, Brew McCoy, Squirrel White. It's just ridiculous what they have in that room, and it's better than a group that was really good with Cedric Tillman and Jalen Hyatt back in the day. But the O-line adding Lance Hurd is absolutely huge to that left tackle position. A very talented kid, has not played too much football, so you got to hope he holds up the way that you're expecting him to. But if he gives Nico time, it's going to be more than fine. The schedule obviously is going to be tough. Whenever you get UGA and Bama essentially every year, it's going to be a nightmare. But beyond that, they should be favored in pretty much every game. I think every game that they play beyond that. Oklahoma, NC State, Kentucky. Those are the 3 games that I think if they go 3-0 in those games, they're going to be a 10-2 team, and they're likely going to be in the playoff. If they go 2-1, things get a little bit more sketchy. If they go 1-2, they might just be out the door. And those are games that they could go any of those in. I'll be totally honest with you, because all of those teams, while on paper don't stack up to Tennessee, at least top to bottom, they can play better football on one given Saturday, and that's all you got to do if you're those teams. So Tennessee is a championship level team. There's not a lot of things that are not in place for them to do that. If Nico hits the way that they expect him to hit, the way that a lot of people across the country expect this kid to hit, they're going to be in that conversation. And as long as they don't have a 2022 Hendon Hooker situation where a guy's on his way to a Heisman ceremony and maybe winning that award, and then he gets injured and the end of the season is not great by any means, if that doesn't happen, this team is off running. And I think this is going to be a very, very interesting thing. And the game that's obviously going to define this, if they roll against NC State, start watching this team very closely. If they win by 21 points against NC State, things get really interesting really quickly. But that'll be fascinating to watch. But the other team I want to break down is that team. NC State is a team that I think is so fascinating in the ACC. And I think when you look at this team, the big thing about it is the offense is going to be near the top in the conference. And whenever you have that, especially in a conference that it feels like all of the offenses are good. I don't necessarily have an offense in this conference, at least among the big dogs in this conference, that I think is going to be bad. the number one spot is still very much up for grabs in terms of who's going to have the best who's going to have the best offense. And NC State did a ton to put themselves in a really good position there. Bringing in Grayson McCall is huge. Jordan Waters is absolutely massive. Noah Rogers has absolutely turned heads in spring and is a very talented kid. Justin Jolie, all of those kids came in from the transfer portal on the offensive side of the ball. Those are huge pieces, and frankly, a lot of them got a hit. I think at least 3 of the 4 of those guys got a hit, including the quarterback and the running back just have to. Grayson McCall has to be great. Jordan Waters has to be great, and everything else would kind of come into play, and that leaves out the best offensive player they have, which is Kevin Concepcion. So this offense is going to be absolutely incredible. I think they did an absolute haul, and every single one of those players is going to be huge for this team. The defense is a little bit more of a worry. They were really solid a year ago, only giving up 20 points per game, but Peyton Wilson did leave, and that is the biggest player on their defense by a mile a year ago. He was so important to that team. They still have some dudes that absolutely can make some plays, but it might take a little bit of a step back. So you're likely going to need a high-level offense, but they have it. Everything is in place for this team to be high level. If they can unlock that 2021 version of Grayson McCall and get elite football out of him, things get really interesting. They could win the ACC title. They could go to the college football playoff and be the team that's kind of the TCU or the Washington of this year that just continuously wins really close matchups and finds their way into the playoffs. So it'll be a fascinating team to watch there. And now let's move up to the Big Ten and talk about the team that everyone's talking about. Nebraska is such an interesting team. I saw that Joel Klatt had one of his conversations with that guy right there, Matt Rule, and he feels very confident about this team. It's very clear that he thinks this team is capable of a ton of things this upcoming season, and among them, competing for the Big Ten. And I know that sounds a little bit crazy with the way that Nebraska has gone the last couple of seasons, but this is a team that has a lot in place. Jamal Banks and Isaiah Nair were absolutely huge additions at wide receiver from the portal because not only are they experienced guys that have a lot of really good football behind them, but they're really tall. And that sounds very, very, trivial, but when you have a young quarterback who might not put the ball exactly where it needs to be every time, having guys that are long, that have really strong hands is a blessing. It is absolutely huge for that team. It's the same thing that happened at Florida State the last couple of years where Jordan Travis was a good quarterback and definitely put the ball where it needed to be, but having guys like Keon Coleman and Johnny Wilson definitely helped him have that completion percentage just a touch higher than it would have been if those guys were a couple inches shorter. But overall, it's going to be great for him on that front. Gabe Ervin and Ramir Johnson, I think, are going to be great in the running game. Both those guys are going to have to be huge, but a very, very solid duo to build around there. The defense is going to be awesome. Period. End of story. They're going to be a very, very good defense. 9th in the country in returning production from an 11th defense in the country a year ago. So I have no worries about this team. I think Natch Hutchmeyer, I think MJ Sherman, Tommy Hill, all of those guys are going to be huge for this team, and they all had pretty good 2023s. I think they're going to have really good 2024s, and I think MJ Sherman might just be the game changer of that group in my eyes. So this is a team, it's going to be a good team. There's no two ways about that. I think they're going to win. Frankly, I think they will win 8 games. I feel really good about them winning 8 games. Way they get to 9, 10, maybe even beat a big-time team in Ohio State or something like that and get to 11 wins is one guy, in my opinion, and it's Jalen Lloyd. I think this guy is an absolute game changer for this team. He can open up so many things in this offense that just haven't necessarily been in the past, and he showed in them flashes last year, but the explosivity of this offense is going to be where the money is made for the most part. Isaiah Nair is a deep threat. That's just the way that he works. Jalen Lloyd is a very speedy guy that you can get the ball all over the field, and he can be a deep threat just by catching and running with the ball. So he can do incredible things, and I think this offense is going to be a little bit, segmented at points. It's going to have some really, really tough stretches. It's going to have some really, really great stretches. If you can have a deep ball, those tough stretches become a lot better if you can just hit 1 or 2 of those big time plays in a game and totally change the complexion. So I think that's really the key to this season. Can Jalen Lloyd be the player that they all expect him to be? And if he is, then things get really interesting. They could walk into that Ohio State game 8-0 and then it's off to the races. So it'll be fun to watch this team for sure. And then finally in the Big 12, I got Arizona. And I fought between Arizona and Texas Tech here. I think both those teams have a ton riding on this year and could make some big time noise, but I picked the Wildcats for one very simple reason, and it's those two guys right there. Noah Fafita and Tatori McMillan is about as good as a quarterback duo as you will see in the entire country. I could make the argument that Brady Cook and why am I blanking? Brady Cook and Luther Burden, wow, are a little bit better than him. I could make the argument that Jackson Dart and Trey Harris are up there, but this is a really good duo. And it's not that McMillan is alone out there by any means. Montana Lamonius Craig is someone that made a ton of waves in the Colorado spring game a year ago and never really quite got the production that you wanted out of him, but definitely someone that could take a big step forward. Romello Wilson is a great transfer they brought in, absolutely huge there. Another transfer they brought in was Ja'Cory Krosky Merritt, a very talented kid from New Mexico State. I think this is going to just be a really, really talented group on offense, and it's the same way it was during Jedd Fisch. As long as they can get the, production and the scheme that Jedd Fisch had in place, they'll be more than fine. There's no two ways about that. So I think it's going to be a really good group overall. The defense is where they need to make a leap. Let's just be totally honest. The front seven is a lot of new guys from the portal. A lot of guys that are coming in and definitely will play some big-time roles. Jacob Manu and Justin Flo being your middle linebackers that have been there for a while definitely makes that confidence go up a little. Even if you are filling all of the spots in front of them, having those two guys as kind of quote-unquote backstops for the front seven is absolutely huge. And then you have Tacario Davis. It's a name that some of you might know right now, but everyone will know very, very soon. This is a guy that flirted with the portal but made his way back to Tucson, and bringing back or keeping Noah Fafita and Tatori McMillan in town was as big of a move as there was for Arizona this offseason. This was number 2, and it was very, very close number 2 because this guy is so talented, likely will be a first-round draft pick, frankly, from that cornerback position. So this is going to be incredible. This team absolutely can take over the Big 12 in their first year. They just got to find some of that magic that they found late last season a little bit earlier in the season. They have games at Utah and at Kansas State in week 3 and 4, and those could kill the Wildcat season, or they could make them the team that everyone is chasing in that conference. So it's going to be fascinating to watch this team. I think they have so much going into this season, and there's so many guys like Tacario Davis, like Noah Fafita, like Tatori McMillan that are going to have plenty to say about this season and are plenty talented to make it really, really good for them. So I think there's a ton of teams that I didn't even mention in this that could turn their conference on their head. But when I look at those 4 in particular, it's a different level that they could hit. I think all of those teams have in them a run to their conference title game. Whether or not they get there might be a little bit tougher. Nebraska definitely has a little bit tougher of a path than some other teams. Tennessee, the same exact thing. But all of these teams are capable of some really remarkable things and just can't wait to see how their seasons unfold. But let's take our third break here. When we come back, it's all about recruiting because the last 5 days have been just insane. So I want to break down everything you guys need to know, including Texas Longhorns moving in the wrong direction on the recruiting trail. So we'll break that down right after this.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some of the teams that can flip their conference on its head in the Power 4. Tennessee is the big one for me. I think they can do pretty much anything this upcoming year as long as Nico Iamaleava comes into place the way that they expect, but a number of other teams that absolutely can make that noise as well. But let's get into segment 4 here, and it's all about recruiting. There is so much stuff going on in the world of recruiting that we just got to keep up with it. It's incredible how much stuff is happening every single day, and it's not the easiest thing to keep up with, but we're going to do our best right here. And the biggest one of the weekend was Decorian Moore. Decorian Moore is the number one wide receiver in the country. He was committed to LSU in the past, has committed to Oregon now. This is a huge, huge win for Oregon, the biggest commit they have ever had in their history. So that's a huge moment for the program, for Dan Lanning, and everything for the Ducks moving on. Texas is the one that missed out here. LSU and Ohio State were in this conversation, but really towards the end of the day, it was a Oregon against Texas battle, and Oregon won. And a lot of people are pointing towards NIL and that type of thing, and obviously that's going to play a part in some of these recruitments, but Oregon just out-recruited Texas is what it sounds like. Oregon pitched him a vision of come be different, come do something that no one else is willing to do, that everyone, wants you to stay in Texas. Be different, come out here, be part of what we're building in Oregon, and it worked. So at the end of the day, we can talk about Oregon, going after NIL a ton, and they should because of the people that they have in their alumni base. But regardless, this just seems like really good recruiting by Oregon, and I think they just did a better job than all the other teams at the end of the day. But it does make guys for Texas like Khalil Lockett, Jamie French, Kelshawn Johnson making a decision here pretty soon that got messed up a little bit by the hurricane coming through Texas. Hope everyone is okay there. But overall, those are super important guys. If they want to have the wide receiver class that they can have and still be a very, very good class with even without Decorian Moore, but that's a huge hit, and they're going to have to definitely take some big-time steps forward over the next couple of weeks at that position in particular. But that's not where the bad news stopped for Texas by any means. Riley Pettijohn, a very talented linebacker, one of the top linebackers in the class, committed to Ohio State over the weekend. Another one that Texas led for until the last couple of weeks, and not really sure exactly what happened that pushed him towards Ohio State, but regardless, a huge win for Ohio State. If you are a Texas fan, the guy to watch going forward is Madden Faramo, a very talented guy, a heavy Notre Dame lean right now, but Johnny Nansen, the linebacker coach down at Texas, has a ton of ties there, so that's one that they're trying to kind of win over right now. So definitely not the loss that they wanted. This is a guy that they very much expected to be in the fold, at least up until about a week ago. So not necessarily the best of times down in Texas recruiting. And then finally, losing Brandon Brown to LSU over the weekend. He flipped from Texas to LSU. Is a huge one, but it's a much more expected than the other ones. He had a great relationship with Bo Davis, who left Texas to go to LSU. This one was just kind of expected. And also, Kenny Baker is the new defensive line coach down there at Texas, and he came from the NFL. So it's never going to be easy for him to get some of the connections, some of the networking that needs to be done to be an elite recruiter, especially in the state of Texas. It's going to take him some time. But the reality is, if Alfred Collins, if Vernon Broughton, if all of those big-time guys play at an elite level this upcoming year, it won't be a problem going forward. It's just, as of right now, they don't know what to expect. So it's definitely a fight that Texas is really in the throes of right now. But Cade Phillips is one that kind of softened the blow just a little bit. A 4-star DB did commit to Texas this past weekend, a big-time pickup there, someone that they very much like, and I think this is one that could be the start of a good little stretch here for Texas. I think Khalil Lockett is going to make a decision here pretty soon. So is Kelshawn Johnson and some other guys that Texas is definitely in the milieu for. I think one guy that they just need is Michael Fasusi. If they cannot bring in Michael Fasusi and he ends up going to A&M, then it's panic time. But as of right now, you're looking a little bit worried. Let's just put it that way over at Texas. But another team I want to touch on is Missouri. Lamont Rogers, a very, very talented offensive tackle, 6'7", 322, 4-star out of Mesquite, Texas. He's going to Missouri, and this is another one that Texas lost. This was more of a Missouri-OU battle towards the end, but Texas was absolutely in on this thing. So Lamont Rogers, a very, very talented player. Missouri just continues to do work on the recruiting trail. It's really remarkable to watch how quickly this thing has turned into a terrifying recruiting entity, to be totally honest. And then you have Javon Boggs, a very talented 4-star receiver. I think this guy is going to be a game changer from the get-go, if I'm being totally honest. Was an Ohio State commit, but found his way back around to Mizzou. They also got Donovan Olugbode. I don't want to pronounce it wrong, but he is committed to Missouri as well. A big time commitment there, and elite recruiting is just who Missouri is at this point. Eli Drinkwitz and the Tigers have really created a remarkable group out there, and they're just doing work on the recruiting trail. Miami also had a huge weekend. Hilton Stubbs, a very talented 4-star that decommitted from USC just a little bit ago, has committed to Miami officially, a big-time commitment there. They also got a big-time commitment from 4-star interior offensive lineman CJ Alufatuli. I'm going to do my best. A very talented 4-star interior offensive lineman, definitely a really talented guy that they were battling Michigan and Nebraska for. So when you can win those offensive line battles, absolutely huge between those two teams. And then DJ Pickett, another guy I want to talk about, the top cornerback in the country. He's between LSU, Miami, and Oregon. Whoever wins out there is going to get a huge player, and Oregon's looking really impossible to beat right now, but Miami and LSU, frankly, are very much in this fight as well. But let's get to some other commitments, and we're going to move a little bit rapid fire here. Ty Hawkins, a very talented kid, has decommitted from TCU and committed to SMU. This is a big-time pickup at the quarterback position for them, and SMU is one that is getting a little bit scary. I'll just be totally honest. We'll unpack that a little bit more throughout the week. But Jalen Cooper is another 4-star wide receiver. They got committed to SMU this weekend. So an elite duo coming to Dallas, that's for sure. LSU did not stop at Brandon Brown on the defensive line. They got Zion Williams, an elite defensive lineman, to commit to LSU, a big-time player that had offers from everyone. And Bo Davis is finally getting the guys that he needs to get, and it's only a matter of time until they turn into just a scary group out there in Baton Rouge. So obviously this is a huge time commitment, but Damian Shanklin is an absolutely big commitment as well, coming off the edge. He is someone that, it was a Bama-LSU battle, so that's always a great one to win for LSU. They love winning those battles, and it'll be fascinating to watch this one unfold. A very, very good weekend for LSU for sure. Florida State got in on the action a little bit. Peyton Joseph, a very talented offensive line commit, 4-star interior offensive lineman, was previously committed to Florida, so that's always a little bit of a fun one for the Noles fans out there to stick it to Florida a little bit. But moving on here, we have a 4-star safety, Jadon Blair, a very talented kid out of Notre Dame. He is someone that is definitely going to be a huge piece of this class, because it sounds like their other top safety, Ivan Taylor, might be heading towards Michigan. I believe he got an expert prediction from Steve Wiltfong over the weekend, so that's definitely one to watch. On the other side of this, you get a commitment, sometimes you lose a commitment from that position. So obviously a big-time pickup there, but Notre Dame could be losing the biggest guy in their class in Ivan Taylor. And then you have Omarion Robinson, a very talented safety, heading to Oklahoma, a big-time pickup, and Oklahoma just continues to bring in guys. It's not necessarily an onslaught of dudes all at once, but it's just a couple of guys every couple of weeks, and they're just doing really, really good work on the recruiting trail right now. And then finally, Shamari Earls, a very, very talented kid that was committed to South Carolina, now committed to Georgia. So another big-time win against a team that I'm sure Georgia loves getting wins over. The number 8 cornerback in the country, according to On3, so a very talented kid. Definitely a big-time pickup for Georgia. So a lot going on in recruiting, to say the least. There are so many commitments, so many decommitments, and so many things to watch. David Sanders dropped his top 4 that didn't have Clemson in it, which was very, very interesting. This is a number 2 player in the country, so that'll definitely be one to watch. It sounds like Georgia is kind of leading just a little bit, but Tennessee is pushing, Nebraska is pushing, Ohio State's pushing. So we'll figure out what happens with that one. Just so much stuff going on in the world of recruiting, but overall, the things to watch as we get throughout the rest of this month is, what does Texas do throughout the rest of this month? Is LSU, Miami, Oregon, do they continue to surge? Is Bama still have a little bit left in the tank and making some things happen behind closed doors? So a ton of stuff to follow over the next little bit, and we absolutely will keep you updated. But let's take our final break here, and when we come back, we're going to do a little bit of a different segment, a Monday roundup, where we just go around some news in college football. There's been a ton of big-time headlines that have been not so great headlines, frankly, but I want to break them down for you, get you guys updated on everything going on in our sport. So we'll break that down right after this, so stick with us. Alrighty, welcome back, everyone. We just did a little bit of recruiting update, tons of stuff going on. Decorian Moore going to Oregon was the biggest of the bunch, but a ton of other stuff that we had to break down. So definitely is a huge time in recruiting, and we'll continue to break down everything as you guys need to know it. But let's get into kind of a new segment around here called Monday Catch Up. Excuse me. We've had tons of big-time headlines around college football that have been a little bit, I don't want to say cryptic. You see headlines come across your screen and you know that there's a very interesting story there. You know there's something that you want to unpack, but maybe there's not enough details. Maybe there's not enough, just not enough there to feel confident about doing a full 12-minute segment about it. I think there's a number of things on this list that we will revisit as, the season as we come up to the season and maybe into the season, but there's a couple of things that we need to break down, and frankly, they're not great headlines. I'll just be totally honest with you. We'll start with Ollie Gordon. He was arrested on DUI charges this past week, had a number of different things that went on throughout this time. The story is apparently he was arrested Sunday morning on suspicion of a DUI. He was going 85 and a 65, or 82 and a 65, excuse me, and he had a half-full bottle of vodka, a half-full bottle of tequila in his car. His blood alcohol content was above legal limit at 0.11. This is obviously a very talented kid. No two ways about that. This is a kid that is coming off a Doak Walker Award season, a very, very elite running back, and someone that has his eyes set on something bigger, the Heisman this upcoming year, and this might just ruin those chances. There is a real chance that the availability for Gordon in the first few weeks of the game is non-existent. There is a chance that he gets suspended for those games. I'm not sure exactly how they're going to handle it. I'm sure a lot of this will be in-house, but I know Mike Gundy, and he does not play. I'll just be totally honest. So I would not be surprised by any means if he was suspended for a couple of games and was left out of those few games. Now, it doesn't necessarily change too much about Oklahoma State's season in particular because those first two games are some layups. But the reality is, obviously, will change the way this man's career goes over the next year and possibly going further. Obviously, overall, the biggest thing here is just very happy no one was hurt, very happy that Ollie Gordon wasn't hurt and no one else was, and he can move forward from this and hopefully learn from this. That's obviously the overall goal when any of this type of stuff starts to happen, is just make sure that everyone is healthy and safe and he moves forward and, makes better decisions going forward. So obviously a huge player in college football. This will be a story that we'll start to unpack a little bit more in some way or another as the season rolls on, but definitely changes up the complexion of this season for Ollie Gordon and for Oklahoma State overall. So definitely will be a very interesting thing to watch. And again, overall, just very happy everyone's safe and healthy. That's the most important thing in any of these cases. But I want to touch on Blake Anderson as well. He has been dismissed. He's on administrative leave from Utah, is likely to be fired, as they said. But it sounds like there was some things that there was an external review of allegations that had compiled against the Title IX policies regarding sexual misconduct cases. Essentially, it means someone in that building did not handle a certain case, a certain allegation the correct way. That's the cut and dry of it. Nate Dreeling will be the head coach going forward, at least into this season. He's the defensive coordinator around there, a very highly respected guy around there, so should be fully confident in his abilities. But obviously this is going to be a huge story for a number of reasons, not just because of the effect on the college football team, but because of the effect on some other people in this case. And obviously I don't want to speak too much on this because we don't know all the facts, and obviously the sensitive nature of this, do not want to speak out of turn by any means. But it does seem like there will be more information coming out over the next little bit. They do need to get 14 days into his administrative leave to start releasing some of that information and being a little bit more forthright about what exactly happened here. And that's definitely something that we will likely unpack as it kind of comes out and see if there's, big time story here. But overall, this is going to be a very interesting thing. Anderson and his attorney, Tom Mars, has said they intend to sue the university if he's fired with cause, because they don't feel like there's justification to fire him with cause. So it'll be a very interesting thing to kind of unfold. But again, not a great headline in the world of college football, and definitely something that we'll speak on a little bit more as more facts come out. I just didn't want to speak on anything that I didn't know was absolutely fact as of right now. And then this next one is one that just made my heart drop. I'll be totally honest with you. Kyrie Jackson has died in a car accident. He died, I believe, 2 days ago with two other former college athletes, Anthony Linton Jr., a former Florida State player, and Isaiah Hazel, a former Charlotte player. So first of all, thoughts go out to all of those families. I can't even imagine what they're going through right now. Just an absolute nightmare scenario for them. But Kyrie Jackson was a very good kid. He was a kid that was drafted number one, 108th overall to the Vikings in this year's draft, and was someone that battled. There's really no other way to put it. He was at junior college. He got into some trouble off the field and had some not so great moments that I'm sure he would love to have back, but he found his way through it, and he got to Bama, and he got to Oregon, and he played some really good football at both those places, and was in the process of living out his dream. And then obviously his life got cut just way too short. So this is one of those headlines you hope that never comes across your screen. One of those headlines that always just kills you every time that you see something like this. And Kyrie Jackson was someone that so many people, especially recently at Oregon and his early time at Vikings, just everyone had rave reviews. They all talked about how incredible this kid was on and off the field. They talked about how hard he works. And it's just, it's one of those things that really puts a lot of things in perspective. I'll just put it that way. But that's him with J.J. McCarthy, obviously, another guy that spoke just incredibly highly of him throughout those rookie mini camps. And yeah, it's just it's one of those moments that really makes you reflect and makes you wonder a lot about a lot of different things. But overall, just a terrible moment for all three of those families. Obviously, thoughts going out to all of them, and hope that, you know, they can find some type of peace in this terrible time for all of them. So obviously this is a incredibly sad story. Hope that, you know, people can find some type of peace in this. That's always what you hope in these scenarios, but a really, really terrible thing. And hope that everything can kind of, I don't know. I don't really have too much else to say here, but obviously gone far too soon, and thoughts and prayers out to all of the families that were affected here. Kyrie Jackson, Anthony Linton, and Isaiah Hazel. 3 losses that way too soon. I can say that pretty confidently. And then finally, want to break down a little bit of a coaching change up a little bit. A Nebraska assistant, Evan Cooper, the defensive back coach, has resigned from his position due to personal reasons. They worked very quickly to find a replacement in the Bills defensive back coach, John Butler, a very talented guy that obviously has a ton of experience at both levels of football. So no problem there in terms of who you're getting back, but the details of Evan Cooper leaving the job are unknown as of right now. Hope everything is okay with his family and everything is more than fine there, but this is the type of thing that usually doesn't happen, which, you know, obviously adds to this a little bit and definitely is a huge thing because Evan Cooper is a very important person around those hallways. He does a ton on that defensive side of the ball that makes them the team that they are, and it's a huge loss. He was someone that was with Matt Rule for quite some time and definitely was a very highly respected person. So this definitely throws a little bit of the wrench into the works for Nebraska, and we won't really know how impactful it is until the season starts, obviously, and we see how everything's kind of coming together. But this is obviously a very interesting mix-up to the season that Nebraska fans did not expect to happen by any means. But overall, hope everything is okay with Evan Cooper and his family, and they can kind of smoothly move forward with this transition. But this will be hugely impactful for the season, and it'll be really interesting to watch. But overall, not this week that we wanted in this sport. I can tell you that. This was a very, very frustrating week. A lot of headlines that came across your screen that you just hated to see for a number of different reasons. But this is something that I just didn't want to gloss over any of these stories. I didn't want to miss out on any of these stories because so many things are happening around the sport, and yeah, I just wanted to make sure that I covered all of these because they deserve to be covered. And it definitely will be something that we'll likely do kind of infrequently. We'll figure out, whenever I need to do a little bit of a catch up with some of the big headlines, we'll do this type of segment and make sure that you guys know everything that you need to know. A couple of those we'll likely unpack in one form or another throughout the upcoming towards the season, whether it's Ollie Gordon and the implications of what happened to him. Blake Anderson obviously is going to be a huge one to talk about. Nebraska and how this affects them. And then just remembering Kyrie Jackson and who he was is obviously something that I will try to do as much as I can. But overall, not the week of headlines that we wanted around college football, but definitely ones that I think everyone should know about. But obviously, we'll do that whenever we really see fit over the next little bit. But that'll do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all of the social pages for all of the content and updates you could possibly need. We just have incredible people doing really, really good work across every single sport you could want. So definitely come on over to GSMC and we totally have you covered in the world of sports. But thank you once again for listening, and I will see you guys tomorrow.